Hey, I'm Casey, and I'm just sharing some tips and tricks with new videographers and cinematographers, people who are just starting out, and yeah, just some things that I learned along the way over the last 5-6 years of doing this, and some things I had to learn the hard way, some things I didn't, but most things I had to learn the hard way. So first starting out, this is kind of a basic one, and there's way more to it than I'm gonna give you. So these are just more so like good research points, but I'm gonna share very basics, just so you know where to start. So first things first, 4K versus 1080p, or just like higher resolution for that matter. You can get 6K, 4K, but a standard over the last few years, 10 years, has been 1080p, but things are really starting to change where it's like almost everything is 4K deliverables at this point. So just keep that in mind when you're looking for a new camera. Basically all it means is a higher resolution image. So if you're shooting 6K, that's higher resolution than 4K. 4K is going to be higher resolution than 1080p, and really just what that means is you're going to get a crispier image out of those higher resolution cameras. It just has more pixels. But that being said, you can also use it as a tool. You can crop into those images if you need, so you can do things like digital zoom, and if you just want a tighter shot, you can just crop into it. But that just leads me into my second point, which is going to be full frame versus crop sensor cameras. To simplify this, I'm going to give you an example. So right now you're looking at me through a 28mm lens that's on a full frame sensor. So that's the field of view that you're going to get from that is what you're looking at, versus shooting on a micro four thirds camera, which is a crop sensor. It has a 2x crop factor. That is going to look like this. So a 28mm is going to look more like a 50mm on a micro four thirds camera, and vice versa. Like, you're going to get more field of view out of a full frame camera. The bigger the sensor, the more field of view. And then the last just technical thing that I have to cover, that is, I know, just like very basic for some of y'all that might be watching, but higher frame rate or slow-mo footage. So when somebody asks you to shoot slow-mo, most of the time that just means shoot a higher frame rate. So something like 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second. Those frame rates will let you slow things down in post. Most cameras, aside from a few companies like Sony and some other companies out there, they're not going to slow down the footage in camera for you. So that means when you shoot a 60 frame per second video clip, it's going to just show up in real time in camera. So you're gonna have to take that into some kind of post-production program where you can slow that down back down to 24 frames a second or 30 frames a second. Keep that also in mind. You should probably be doing most projects in 24 frames per second. That's just a standard. So I'll leave the technicals there. Some other things that you should look up is the 180-degree shutter rule. Basically just means double your frame rate and then divide 1 by that, and that's going to be your shutter speed. So 1/48, if you're shooting in 24 frames a second, is going to be your shutter speed. Some cameras just do shutter angle, some just do shutter speed. So just look up the 180-degree shutter rule. It's going to help you out a ton. It's going to keep you from getting weird looking footage when you don't want weird looking footage. A big thing when it comes to purchasing cameras is going to be lenses over camera body. A big thing when you're crafting the look of a project or an image or a video, whatever it be, that's going to be the lenses that do that most of the time. Like, lenses are going to give you a lot of the character that you see in certain images. Also, really nice glass will last you a really long time. If you spend money, you're going to get most of the time a good product that's going to last you a few camera bodies, versus the camera body you're most of the time going to upgrade every few years. So just keep that in mind. You most of the time want to be, in my personal opinion, would be splitting my budget in this way: 1/3 on the camera body and then 2/3 spent on lenses. And you can kind of spend that money how you choose on the lenses. I would probably recommend getting like 2 prime lenses, or maybe a prime and a zoom, or maybe just spending it on a nice zoom lens like a 24-70 from Sigma or like Canon, or one of those. Depending on what company you go to, they're most of the time going to have like a 24-70 type lens that has like an aperture of an f2.8. And so you want to be looking for something that you can get for a relatively good price, but something that has a lower aperture so you can get that depth of field that you are probably looking for out of purchasing a actual DSLR camera or a mirrorless camera. You know, that's going to be a huge difference between your phone and that, and the best way of achieving that is going to be through the lenses that you buy. And like I said, you're going to be able to most of the time use them across multiple different cameras and depending on what you choose. So yeah, it's just better to invest more money into your glass at first rather than your camera body. It's just most of the time going to be a better investment. So lenses over camera body. That does lead me into my next point though, which is vintage lenses. I think there's a huge value that most people leave out on the table with vintage lenses, especially as a filmmaker starting out or a videographer starting out. You're going to want to be experimenting with different focal lengths and different types of lenses and different apertures and all that kind of stuff. And a really, really cheap way of attaining lenses that can do that for you is buying vintage. Vintage lenses have so much character, and there's desirable things about certain series, and they can be a good investment themselves. Honestly, I see it as a good way of cheaply investing into something that you're looking into buying. You know, you can get a vintage lens for pretty cheap and without having to actually buy a native lens that has full autofocus and stuff like that. And you can find out the things that you want to find out before making that huge purchase. This is gonna also go back into another point that I have, but yeah, vintage lenses, they're also something that you're probably gonna keep over the years. Even if you buy something for cheap and you're going to replace it, they still have a certain character to them, so you might end up pulling them out of the bag every once in a while. They're full metal, the glass is usually sharp, they usually have a low aperture, so you can get good depth of field out of them. Just overall, good investment to be making. Yeah, we'll go ahead and move into the next thing, which is gonna be don't get gas. And gas is gear acquisition syndrome. Whew, sorry, that's a hard one for me to say. Yeah, you can get caught up with the, latest and greatest stuff and feeling like you need it or have to have it for your next shoot. Usually it just ends up overcomplicating things until you figure out exactly what you need for every single shoot. And that just takes a little bit of time. Do your research, see if it's something that's actually going to be worth it for you, actually going to return some investment or some kind of result that you're going to consistently need. And then that kind of leads me into my next thing, which is, I know, a little bit contradictory of what I just said, but buy once, cry once. And filmmaking is definitely a buy once, cry once kind of industry. You're going to have to invest some money into some products, and that sucks, but you really just don't want to cheap out with certain stuff. For instance, you spent all this money on a nice camera and lens and you just put it on a $50 tripod that just broke and then broke the rest of your gear. You don't want to cry twice, do you? Buy once, cry once. Do your research. There are some companies that do produce good budget gear. Just don't get caught up with budget-oriented stuff. It can sometimes bite you. Most of the time it will bite you, and you'll end up getting the brand name thing, so just keep that in mind. All right, the last thing I'm going to cover is going to be composition over motion. And I know this might sound a little bit weird to some of y'all. I know it's like the very basics of filmmaking and photography, but a lot of people don't fully develop that before they start getting into other more complicated things, and then those other more complicated things suffer because they don't have the foundations of just forming a good composition. Even when you have motion in your shot, you're going to want to start and end with a good composition, and if you've never built those foundational skills for finding that, then you're never going to have good shots with motion. So everything leads into each other. Look up things like rule of thirds, golden ratio, leading lines. Yeah, just starting out, just focus on composition over motion, and just really focus on building composition. A good way of doing that is just going out and taking photos. It's a still frame. The only thing you really have as a storytelling device is the composition. So go out there, maybe just shoot around for a day. All right, so those are going to be my just like starting out tips for, I feel like those would be the things that I would focus on if I was doing this again, starting from scratch. Yeah, if y'all want me to cover any of this stuff in depth or want to go further into one of these topics, just please let me know in the comments below. I think also I'll just leave you with this just very, very general tip. Go out and shoot. Like, if you're not out there shooting, then you're not getting the practice that you need. And practice makes perfect. And even the information that I'm giving you right now, if you're not going out and trying to actually apply it on something, then it's just wasted knowledge. So go out and shoot. Get a camera in your hands every day if you can. You know, join a club or join something that is going to force you to do that. Or if you're in school doing it, like, try and collaborate with people. See if anybody's trying to do any projects that, you know, are not assignments. Yeah, you just got to get out and shoot, because if you're not doing that, you're failing at all of this. So yeah, keep a camera in your hands, and I will see y'all later.